catch can, how to install one, and how to set one up under a budget. Now, if you buy a nice one like a Mishimoto or some of the other brands that are out there, then all you've got to do is throw it together, plug and play. You don't need to add any steel wool. It should be ready to go for you, especially if it's vehicle specific. But what we're doing here on a budget is basically this guy right here is $30 on eBay or Amazon online. You can get these. There's tons of companies who sell them, and they're all basically the same. You can get them all kinds of colors. So what we're going to do is, first of all, explain why an oil catch can is so important for a high-performance vehicle. Now, what happens during the combustion cycle is that some of the pressure in the cylinder, whenever it's firing and you're having power transferred through your engine, some of the pressure will actually leak past the rings. Now, it's not much, but you got to think, at 2,000 RPM, 3,000, 4,000 RPM, there's 8. If you have an 8-cylinder, there are 8 combustion cycles for every 2 RPM. So that's a lot of pressure going in and going that can seep past those rings. Well, that's why we have a Pcv valve. Now, what the Pcv valve does is it takes the positive crankcase pressure, okay? So Pcv stands for positive crankcase ventilation. Now, what you're going to do with that valve is basically it's a one-way valve. Pressure can come out where your valve cover or wherever the PC valve is mounted. On a Hemi, it's typically mounted on the filler neck of the oil or on the valve cover. Now, what it does basically is just allows it to be vented. Usually that goes right to the intake. Well, that is a problem for tuning. Oil will cause the octane level of your fuel and air mixture to drop. We don't want that. We want as high octane level as possible, so that way we can get the most power and the most timing out of it. If you don't have the ability to run all the octane that you need to have optimal timing, then you have to back your timing down. And less timing that is not as efficient is going to create less power. So we want all the power we can get. That's why we do oil catch can. Basically, it goes in line of your intake and your PCV valve, and it filters out any oil vapor that is coming through, because you want clean air going in to your engine with some fuel and the right amounts to make the most power. So first thing we're going to want to do is I'm going to show you guys what the inside of this thing looks like, and I'm going to show you how it does the filtering process, filtering that oil out of that crankcase air. So I'll get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and take this thing apart, and we'll show you how it's supposed to work. So one of the first things to note about these oil catch cans, some of them don't have it, but if you get one, most of the ones that are available out there are going to look almost identical to this, but they have a little dipstick right here. And basically, that goes down into the body of it, okay? And it lets you see how much oil is in there. Typically, if it's even on there, as you can see, if it's even touching the dipstick, then it's got some oil in it. I mean, it's got, a good cup or two of oil in that. These are supposed to be 300 milliliters to 400 milliliters. I'm not sure how they're measuring that, whether it's to the top of the cup or up here. I would hope the top of the cup so you don't make a mess pulling it off. But if you get, very far up that stick, more than a couple centimeters, just go ahead and dump it out. You can get rid of this oil. Some people reuse it. Typically, you're doing this, you're changing this about the time you're doing an oil change. So you're just going to chunk that old oil. You don't want that. And it could be aerated too from being in the airflow path. So anyhow, that's your dipstick. That's for checking, see how full it is. Now, we're going to get into what is inside of this bad boy. So I'm going to get it unscrewed for you. Okay, so you see this black fella right here, this black thing, is the filter, the Baffle. Is what does the magic of it. Now, there's also a bracket that comes with this. I've got it loose, because if you don't have it loose when you pull this off, it seems like it wants to scrape it, and I like to keep it pretty. It may or may not do that. Mine might just be like that. So, but on most applications, this is how you're going to mount it to whatever surface you're going to mount it to, and it's just going to mount up just like that. Now, with this, I'm not going to use that on my application. I've got a little different idea for it. That's how it works. There is an O-ring on this. It keeps it from sweating because there's going to be a little bit of pressure in this possibly, or vacuum depending, and you can sweat the oil out of the seals and the threads of these. So you make sure that they come with an O-ring, and if it's not, you might want to look into getting one. So now, see, that's just empty. That's just your cup. It just catches the oil that comes through. Let's see if I can get this guy off. Okay, so it's a Baffle. Now if you look, you can see this has two halves, and it just goes in right here. The oil is going to come in the end, which is coming from the engine, not the intake. It's coming from your crankcase valve, your Pcv valve. However you have it, that ventilation on the valve cover or in the oil system, it's basically going to go to the end. That's where that tube's going to go. And you're going to select the appropriate fitting. It comes with quite a few for you. On anything that's V8, you're probably going to end up using the large one. But don't forget to run those O-rings in there behind the threads when you do that, because you don't want it leaking and making a mess, especially if you got a nice dressed up engine. And these do look nice, so get the most for your money. Now the out, you have the end going from the Pcv valve. The out is going to go to the intake or to wherever it runs. Now on a supercharged or a turbocharged vehicle, anything that's got positive pressure, got boost, you're not going to want to run the out to the intake. You're going to, or anywhere, you know, obviously you can't run it into the intake manifold because you're going to be messing things up. You're going to mess with that air metering that's going on, but it's going to go to the induction system, should we say. Now the out, that's where that's going to go. Remember, in goes to the Pcv valve, out goes to your intake or your induction system. You want this to go to somewhere where there's no boost pressure. So if you have a supercharger or a turbocharger, it needs to go before that. You don't want it in the charge pipes. You don't want it in anywhere where there's going to be boost pressure. So if you've got something like that, I would imagine you know a little bit more about what you're doing. So I'll leave you to it. Another thing, if you have boost, is if you don't want to run this, you can cap the out off, and you can just run this filter on top. It's just a little filter there, and it will basically, the pressure from the crankcase will push through, and it'll still do its job. As you can see, it'll still do its job. It'll come through, and it can just vent out that any extra air or whatever. And essentially that works fine if you want it to. It's just kind of personal preference. I think that's going to eventually fill up with oil, and it's eventually going to make a mess. And it's kind of defeating the purpose of the catch can because it's right there. So, but that's totally up to you on how you want to do that. Personal preference. I'm going to run mine on naturally aspirated. I'm going to run mine back. But remember, if you have boost and you want to hook this up here, run that to a position that is before your turbo or before your supercharger. Okay, so that's just how you want to do that. I prefer not to run those filters. I just think that it kind of defeats the purpose of it. Sure, it looks cool. I prefer not to run them. So I'll leave you up to that. So now this guy does the magic. This is the Baffle. So I'll get it apart. So this Baffle here, basically what happens is it screws together so it's like a little area there. That's meant to put some sort of filtering media in. You don't have to, but they set that up to where you can do that. So what's essentially going to happen with this thing, if you just take it right out of the box and put it on, is you're going to get your fittings, you're going to put it on there. The crankcase ventilation valve, or the PCV, is going to run to the end. It's going to come through. It's going to go into here, and it's right here. It's going to go in, and it's going to go into this little area. See, it's enclosed. It can't get to the other side anyway, anyhow. Now, it's going to come through. It's going to go through this portion. It's going to go through it, then it's going to go through here, and then the air is going to go down into here. Now, this is essentially what it's doing is it's disturbing that airflow, and it's going to cause the oil to condensate, like water on your windshield whenever you, on the mirror, let's put it that way. When you get out of the shower and there's water on the mirror, that's called condensation. So it's where basically the water from the air is collecting. Same thing with this concept. The oil that's in the air is going to condense and turn into liquid instead of being a vapor. And it's going to drip, and it's going to drip down in here, and it's going to sit there. Once it becomes a cooled liquid, it's not going to transfer, it's not going to lift back up. And then this part here, so it came in here through the baffles into the tank part, and then it's going to come into this, and it's going to go on back out to wherever you want it. That's how it works. Now, this is not going to work that good. If you bought an expensive one, then you don't have to do any of this. It should be all set up, good to go, and it will just work. But this isn't going to do a whole lot of really anything, at least in my opinion. So what a lot of folks opt to do is they get some steel wool. Now, this is not going to fit in there, so you're going to have to break it up. You don't want it so tightly packed that the air can't flow through this, because then you're just stopping it up, and then the pressure is going to build in your crankcase, and it's typically not a good thing. So that's what we got to do. You can choose to use steel wool or not. Some people say no, some people say yes. Some people say, well, because there's water vapor that also will come through this, because that's just how it works. Water vapor could come through in little amounts, and it could rust this. If this is coated in oil, it will not rust. I have another one that's actually currently installed that I'm changing to this one for many reasons. I have one that's currently installed, and it works fine. It has this steel wool in there too. It doesn't have this nice stuff. It's just a cup, and the steel wool sits on the top. But the steel wool doesn't rust. I've checked it before. It's fine. So now, don't get no cheap. But this is stainless steel wool. So it's going to be fine. Now, you can choose not to do that. There's a lot of people who think you should do other things, but we're going to use steel wool. So I'm going to break this up and put it in here. You want to pack it in there enough that it's, you can't see through it, but not enough that you can't get it to work. Now, what you can do is once you get it packed, take this, screw it back together, cap it off, and then just blow through there. So just put your mouth around that. It's not very big. Blow through it. It should blow fairly freely. It shouldn't have much restriction. So that's what we're going to do. And then I'll put it back together, and I'll show you how we're going to mount the rest of it, and we'll get it on the truck. And another thing, we've got a new cold air intake on the truck. Much better, much colder, whole lot better. So I'm going to show you guys that too, which is the reason we're changing oil cage cans. So, be right back. Alright, so I got that packed in there. Looked through it, didn't see any light. Blew through it, and it blows through nice and easy. So that's good on the baffles. Put it back together, put the dipstick back in it. I'm not going to run that filter, so I'm going to leave that plug in there. If you run the filter, you're going to take one of these extra ones. Now, I'm using the larger of them, so it only comes with 2 of each size. So I'm using the larger one. So you would grab another size, probably gonna need whatever the biggest one is. So this is the second largest size, it fits fine. If this one is the one you're using, the middle one is the one you're using, then you won't have enough for that. So you're just gonna try to fit one of these bigger ones in there. It should fit, you're just gonna have to force it. So, and then you just take one of your hose clamps and you're gonna clamp it on. Probably is not gonna come off. This is pretty decently made. But, so if you're gonna use the filter on the top, you're gonna have to pull that out. You're gonna have to put an O-ring on the threads. Get that to focus. O-ring on the threads, and then screw it in there, put that on, clamp it on. Remember, you only have 2 of each size, so the more important one is you size your hoses going to this. Use the correct size for that. Then whatever you have left, just use the largest one you have left for that. Now, I've already put the O-rings on these. They are tight fitting. As you can see, this is bigger around than the O-ring. It'll stretch, it'll go on there, and you're good to go. So then we're just going to take them, and we're going to screw them in. You're going to use a wrench to tighten it. It just depends on what size it is. It doesn't have to be ridiculously tight. This is an aluminum can, so it's not a big deal if it's not, you know, perfect. But it's going to go in there. You're going to tighten it enough to where it can squeeze that little O-ring in there. And then, remember, this is all aluminum, because and the reason it's aluminum is because it's got to kind of dissipate the heat. So that way that can do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to cool off that air going through there. So it'll condensate the fluid and go condensate the oil, and it can drip down and set on the bottom. You can check it. Oh, at an oil change. Oh, it's time to change it. Unscrew it from where we got it mounted. Chunk the oil. Put it right back on. Good to go. So we're not going to use this, but it's pretty cool looking. We're not going to use it. Alright, I got it together. I'm going to tighten these up the rest of the way. I'm going to make sure that I got the can on fairly snug and that this is tight, and I'll tighten those. And then we're going to go out, we're going to mount it. You can use that to mount it, but I'm not going to. I've got a little different idea. So we'll see how it turns out. Man, if I can use that bracket anyway. Let's go to the truck. And there it is, mounted, good to go. I can just check this during an oil change. I can go, okay, it's so far on there. Okay, well, alright, time to change it or not time to change it. And when you want to change it, all you gotta do, don't forget to put that back. All you gotta do is take this thing right here, unscrew it, and you're good to go. Now I am gonna put another hose clamp here just for security, because that's basically what's holding it up. I've got this intake, and we're gonna go over that in a different video. But I got this intake, much better than the Can-Am, and that has the spot here. Also, if I have any issues, it just empties into there, and then the filter can double filter that. So shouldn't have any issues, but there it is. Much better setup, way better. Everything matches. It looks pretty. To show you how it goes, obviously that's the out, goes to the airbox part or the induction. Some of them are mounted on the tube. You can do it like that. And then this part, which says in, is going to mount, run. I have it ran down through, over, and that's where the positive crankcase ventilation would normally be. So on that, maybe different. You may have it on the valve cover. That's essentially how it is. If you don't mount it the way I did, you're going to use the bracket that comes with it and mount it somewhere where you can run those same connections. But that's totally up to you on how you're going to do that. I think it come out good. Looks awesome. And we're going to go over this intake in the next video.